So the fundraising registration process at Harbor Compliance comes in about 4 states, and this can even relate even outside of using Harbor Compliance. It's really going to be anywhere. So we talked a lot about when the nonprofit is required to register and where, but let's talk about what it takes to register, the how. So the details in each state are very different, of course, but on the whole, you can think of getting registered in 4 phases: research, apply, monitor, and renew. So we'll get started with research. It's very important to know your current status prior to filing anything, whether you are not registered, in compliance, or in bad standing. Depending on your situation, you will have a specific application, a state fee usually based on revenue or contributions or grant or gross receipts. It varies state by state. You're going to need some supplemental documents like your latest 990 or possibly your IRS determination letter, bylaws, articles of incorporation. Those supplemental documents generally are different depending on the state. So in some states, there are certain prerequisites before you can register as well. For instance, you may have to foreign qualify the nonprofit and appoint a registered agent as a prerequisite. So knowing these requirements up front will help you save time by avoiding rejected applications. So 2, apply. Once you've researched what's necessary in each state specific to your situation and your organization, in each state, you will have to complete the necessary applications accurately and compile the required documents. This often takes a line-by-line review of a form and the instructions. Once you're sure you have everything, you have to ensure proper delivery. So sending the applications to the right agency and address is pretty obvious, but you might be required to file online or by email. I think there still may even be a state or two that requires you to fax it. So you may have heard of the Unified Registration Statement, or the URS. This is a document that was created in an effort to streamline the application process in all states. However, not all states accept this document, and many actually require all sorts of additional supplemental documents to be included. The URS itself is longer and more complex than the standard regular state forms. And trust me, state examiners do not prefer the URS over their own documents. They often take longer to approve than the URS than their own forms. Step 3 of the process, monitor. Once your applications are submitted, you have to monitor your registration status and see them through all the way to approval. It can be a waiting game. Some states take just a couple of weeks to process your application, but in others, you may be waiting months. During that time, you'll be very busy ensuring that they were received and are being processed. An even bigger challenge is resubmitting rejected or deficient applications, dealing with state errors, or even creating a system for tracking all of the registration information and renewal dates moving forward. That time to completion of the initial registration can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. Prior to the pandemic, I know Virginia, as an example, was taking upwards to 6 months to approve their applications. So as you can imagine, every state kind of has their own different timeline here. It varies state to state and what the state processing times are, but through efficient management of the process, sending in the right applications and complete applications can all ensure that processing times are on the low end. Last step, renew. So states require you to renew their registrations. Most states have an annual renewal period. However, there are a few states that are biannually. Tracking renewal due dates and making sure that they are filed on time is extremely, extremely important. Missing deadlines is where states start accruing late fees or penalties, things of that nature. So with this in mind, let's talk about managing compliance on an annual basis. To move forward, begin to identify the states in which your organization is required to register and develop a plan to become compliant. So some things to consider: the time to manage the renewals, files for copies of licenses and applications, a spreadsheet tracking system of some sort to track the registration numbers, due dates, any statute changes to the law or the requirements, calendar systems for deadlines and reminders, time to prepare disclosure statements for the states in which they're required, research to track legislation and administrative changes as well. That's a big thing. So compliance is not a choice, and it's not done by an obligation. Just like with the initial registrations each year, your state fundraising registrations must be renewed. You must again prepare a state renewal application, determine the appropriate fee. Most states typically use a formula that's tied to the 990, which is usually based again on revenue, gross receipts, contributions, and grants. And then they compile the required supporting documentation as well. So the difference between initial and renewal is that the renewal filings have a hard and fast deadline. The states usually assess penalties if you miss a deadline. So again, it is very important to stay on top of these. As the organization becomes registered solicit, it's very important to keep excellent records of your license numbers, your registration due dates, registration dates. You'll need to have a good system of tracking this information all in one place. So many of our clients that have come to us before, managing it in-house, they use some type of an Excel spreadsheet or a calendar reminder system. We find they aren't always helpful in tracking changes, to the state requirements themselves and monitoring any extensions if that's needed. It's really important to stay up to date on the legislation changes as well. I want to mention just a pending piece of legislation that many determine, or many of you decide to register. It is designed to regulate internet fundraising platform used by nonprofits for giving days, peer-to-peer campaigns, and the like. So California AB 2208 is a proposed bill that is currently pending in the California Senate. It was sponsored by the California Attorney General. The bill has already passed the California State Assembly. If it becomes law, it would restrict the internet fundraising platforms and fundraising platform charities from soliciting, receiving, controlling, or distributing funds to charities who are not in good standing, meaning registered or exempted in their state. So I suggest all nonprofits monitor this legislation carefully and be aware that California is the trend leader among states in legislation. We anticipate other states following their lead if this law passes, enacting similar legislation. So on your screen, as a total, roughly in state filing fees, you could expect to budget anywhere between $1,400 and $5,000 for most organizations. Again, those fees are really based off a formula tied to the 990, so that would be a rough estimate for all 41 states combined. So really the question that you're probably all asking is, what does it cost? And again, it's going to be that $1,400 to $5,000 based on your specific situation. That is not a per state cost. It's the total of all state fees combined. The total state fees to register nationwide for nonprofits with less than $100,000 in gross revenue will probably fall on the lower end of that spectrum in terms of the state fees. Nonprofits that exceed the $1 million threshold in gross revenues per year will pay will pay total state fee registrations at the higher end of that spectrum, about $5,000. So fully manage each step of the process, tracking software for reporting, flat rate pricing per state, expert team with a dedicated compliance specialist. So we've talked through the various complexities involved in managing fundraising registration and reporting, as well as the many reasons why your organization should be prioritizing compliance. If you know your organization is not yet registered in all the states that it should be, and you're not yet under any sort of government inquiry or audit, this is your opportunity to register. In doing so, you'll be avoiding the potential consequences of noncompliance. Remember, we generally don't see government agencies open investigations or impose sanctions on organizations that register in good faith. Fundraising registration and reporting across the 41 states can demand hundreds of hours of work, both initially and ongoing. It is a substantial drain on nonprofit staff time. For nonprofits that are not staffed to do the registration and reporting in-house or prefer their staff focus on mission-driven work, outsourcing the management of fundraising compliance can be an efficient and effective way. So Harbor Compliance Managed Compliance Solution is a complete one. We fully manage each and every step of the process along the way. We do the research, we'll prepare your applications, we'll even take care of cutting out the state filing fee checks. That way you don't have to potentially write out 41 checks on your own. We'll compile and mail or email the applications and report all the packages. We'll take care of packaging up everything nice and neat with all the additional supplemental documents. And then following that, once we start submitting them to the states, we'll then begin following up with the states. We'll take care of loading all of that information that's pertinent to your license into our proprietary tracking software, which you and your team would have full access to. You'll be able to see when you're approved, which states you're approved, the type of license you have, as well as the license numbers, renewal due dates, filing fees that were paid, etc. So we really do reduce nearly every bit of the administrative work for our clients. So our fundraising compliance software. Harbor Compliance provides this tracking software for our nonprofit clients. To be clear, the software is for tracking and reporting purposes only. It does not automate the preparation of the fundraising registration applications. Our compliance specialists are actually preparing these by hand, line by line. We found from experience that no software can effectively account for all the contingencies at play. For these reasons, we manage all of the applications ourselves by hand in-house. What our software does do is it offers its reporting insights to make your nonprofit's compliance more efficient. Our software provides total visibility into registrations, state fees, renewal due dates, all of which you can help plan and budget. The software also will include detailed notes from your compliance specialist in regards to where your project's at any given time. So there'll never be an uncertainty in terms of where the project's at, whether if we needed additional information or we're waiting on the state to get back to us. All of that information is going to be easily tracked and monitored within the software. So board members and accountants or auditors can also be given permission to view your current compliance status as well. Our client portal allows you to add as many user colleagues to the account as you like, and we don't charge any additional fees to add other colleagues to the account. So this could be good for leadership or consultants so that they can access it as well. We are always happy to schedule a demonstration of the software to show you some of that functionalities and walk any of your colleagues through how it may be useful for you in your situation at your organization. Some key takeaways. Online fundraising may require nationwide fundraising registration and reporting. Fundraising compliance should be shared to build trust and boost donations. Compliance is a complex, state-specific, and changeable. Compliance obligations and deadlines must be reviewed and tracked annually. Outsourcing management of the fundraising compliance is an efficient, cost-effective, and lets your nonprofits focus on their mission. So nationwide fundraising registration is a donor trust factor and an organization differentiator. It is a sign of legitimacy and a way to drive revenue to support your mission. So please make it a priority. Make certain that your nonprofit is compliant and make sure it stays compliant. Then share the good news of your compliance at every opportunity in all of your online and traditional fundraising materials. Message it to demonstrate your accountability, your transparency, your belief in governance and best practices, and your respect for the public, the sector, and your donors. Then please reach out and let me know how your donors rewarded you. So a couple of action steps. Consider nationwide fundraising registration as a growth strategy for your nonprofit. Discuss outsourcing fundraising compliance to keep your nonprofit efficient and mission focused. Maintaining a legal compliance is a best practice for your nonprofits and is a major area of standards for excellence. The code of ethics and accountability for the nonprofit sector. Fundraising compliance is an important aspect of running a lawful and responsible organization. So as we've learned today, maintaining and messaging compliance in a way to build donor trust and loyalty, particularly in challenging times. Investment in fundraising compliance is truly a growth strategy for nonprofits, one that should be prioritized. The first step prioritizing compliance is sharing this information we've discussed today with your executive leadership and your board of directors. Your organization's leadership has a lot at stake, both personally and as leaders of the organization. Nonprofits compliance reduces the risk of fines, penalties, and loss of organizational and individual reputation. Many are not fully aware of the requirements, the risks of non-compliance, or the benefits of investing in compliance. So now that you understand these details, take initiative to start the conversation within your organization. Emphasize the importance of everyone becoming educated on the topic and advocate for prioritizing compliance as a growth strategy. Make sure to discuss whether it is realistic for your organization to manage these registrations nationwide in-house, or whether outsourcing fundraising registration and reporting to a managed compliance service provider like Harbor Compliance is a better path for your organization. So at this point, I will open it up to questions. Abby, did you want to get started with that?
Yeah, we actually have some great questions that I would love to get into. One is from Jim, and I think he's looking for a little more clarity around a topic you covered at the beginning of the webinar. He asked if the question is about solicitation and not about receiving gifts, why would one not accept donations from states in which you are not registered if you didn't solicit the donation at all? So I guess if the problem is soliciting in, say, New York, if you didn't actually solicit a donation, but you get a donation from someone in New York, why would you not accept that donation?
That's a great question. I actually should have added a little bit more context to that statement too. Really, if you have a donate presence online, you have that donate now button, and someone reaches out and makes a donation. At that point, it's seen as an unsolicited donation, which does not trigger any requirements. So you're in compliance at that point. Now, what I see happen way too many times is that the moment someone makes that donation, you're fine, you're good, but then they get added to your mailing list. And 3 months later, you're saying, hey, thank you for your donation. Would you like to donate to our calls again? Well, right there, you just actively solicited that person, which would trigger those requirements.
That makes a ton of sense. Jim, I hope that is helpful. And it kind of leads me to another question from Kathleen. And I think it has to do with the platform that you're using to solicit donations. So she asked if we have a PayPal donate button on our website, do we need to register in those other states? Is it kind of the same situation?
Yeah, it really all depends if PayPal is actually maintaining the custody of those funds and then distributing them back, or if you're clicking on that PayPal button and those funds immediately go right to your account. Because in that instance, the latter of them would be if it's going directly into your account, that is a form of passive solicitation. So that would trigger requirements nationwide unless you were to have some type of disclaimer that you're not able to accept donations from residents of states where you don't maintain a license at.
Okay. Um, so we're having this conversation around the difference between soliciting and actually getting donations. And I have a question from Lisa, and she wants to know, she's just getting started out. They're very small. At what point do they need to start registering? Does it have anything to do with size or the volume, or does that even matter?
Yeah, so there actually are a handful of states. I would guesstimate about 10 to 15 of the 41 states that currently have fundraising registration requirements that do have, again, those exemption opportunities where you may be eligible for an exemption based on a couple of different factors. And again, this is going to vary depending on the state, but one of the factors would be, the size of the organization and what's reported on the 990. So if you're just getting started and you're relatively small, there are states that do offer exemptions based on a threshold amount. As an example, in one state, if you have less than $25,000 in revenue, you would be exempt. But again, you would still have to submit that exemption filing. But that would
Mm,
probably be where the organization would fall.
okay. Does this also apply to sponsorships in addition, or does it only really apply to individual donors?
No, I mean, even submitting a grant proposal is a form of soliciting. So if you're reaching out to a foundation and you're asking for a $10,000 grant, that grant proposal that you're submitting, you're asking for something of value. So even with those sponsorship opportunities, you're asking for funds and they're making a donation. That would be a form of soliciting.
Okay. And that kind of leads me to another technical question about what counts as soliciting. So Lori, it sounds like she's doing a peer-to-peer event. She said that her nonprofit is located in New York State. They never solicit outside the state, but they do have an exception where some event participants will fundraise for an event on behalf of the organization. So if I'm raising money for an organization in New York State, but I'm in Florida, is that outside the realm of the nonprofit's obligation to be registered, or does the nonprofit still need to be registered where I'm fundraising on their behalf?
Would they be an employee of the organization or are they just kind of a volunteer that are actively fundraising outside of the organization?
I think they're volunteers.
Yeah, so if there are volunteers that wouldn't necessarily apply to them. They wouldn't necessarily have to register in additional states if a volunteer was then, actively fundraising, as long as they're not an employee of the organization, of course. And then, really, again, what it comes down to is that if that individual volunteer is soliciting in another state and they collect some contact information, and then after the fact, they're sending them a thank you note or a letter
Mhm.
for that donation, and telling them here's where they could donate again. That's where you get into the area of where you would need to register.
Okay. That is a really great explanation because I do know I've got a couple of questions about peer-to-peer and how that works. So everyone, I hope that that answers your question well. I have another one from Gail, and she is working with a nonprofit that is registered with Charity Navigator and GuideStar. So, is this separate than working with those organizations that show nonprofit transparency? Does this need to be done in addition to those presences?
Yes. So I know
Okay.
what she would be referring to there. I know like they give you like a gold star that you can put on your website or something along those lines. Really, when you get registered, there's not necessarily, a formal badge, but the way our clients view it is you wear it as a badge of honor. So you post your license numbers, you share on your solicitation materials and your website that you're nationwide compliant or you're registered in a select number of states. But again, as I mentioned in the presentation, there are those 25 states that have specific language called disclosure statements that need to be listed within your solicitation materials. And those are specific to the organization, which would include their mission, their purpose, financial information, board of director information. Again, is going to vary on the state. But those type of disclosure statements is really the language that you would wear as a badge of honor that you would want to show transparency with.
Okay. That actually segues perfectly into a question from Deborah. And she asked if there was any kind of standardized language around disclosure statements. And she wanted to know if there is, or maybe even if there isn't, is there any way she could find examples or templates of disclosure information like that?
Yeah, so of the 25 states, every single one of them is a completely separate set of language that's required.
Oof.
So
Okay.
it's a lot, but I would say certainly you could take a look at our website at harborcompliance.com. Up in the right-hand corner, there's a tab called Information Center. If you were to click on that, it will take you to another screen where there's a search field, a little magnifying glass. If you were to type in disclosure statements, we have every single state that has that disclosure statement requirement. Now, it is going to be boilerplate. It's going to be the language, but a lot of that language is specific to the organization, which would include, again, the license numbers, the state they're located in, things like that. So you can find the boilerplate language, but you would have to plug and play and put your information in those fields.
Okay. I've gotten a lot of questions about where the line is between soliciting within your state and other states on social media. So I've gotten questions about Facebook and YouTube, and if the woman who only raises money in New York State is posting, and I happen to share her appeal to my friends, and my friends donate, how does that work with compliance? It's hard to limit who sees your social media posts or your YouTube videos based on their location.
Yeah, it truly is a really gray area, to be completely transparent. And there is a couple of different ways. So Facebook, they actually do it pretty smart. They actually rolled out their own nonprofit organization. So what they're essentially doing is raising funds using their platform. They maintain the custody of those funds, distribute them back to their own nonprofit, and then essentially then send that off as like a grant or a one-time lump donation. And their organization, their nonprofit, is fully registered nationwide. So
Mm,
that type of thing is okay because again, Facebook has their own nonprofit and they're registered. But other
true.
types of platforms, it's just such a gray area. You'd really have to ask those questions with the platform that you'd be using to determine whether or not that's something that you'd have to be worried about in terms of registering.
Oh, wow. That seems complicated. But I
Well, and
know it seems like another instance of the technology outpacing some of the legislation
exactly. And that's another
around these things.
example of that is like Amazon. You can purchase something
Mm,
on Amazon and they do a Amazon Smiles. That
yeah.
same type of setup, they have their own nonprofit organization. So they're going to maintain the custody of those funds and distribute a lump sum. So you don't need to worry about it because Amazon's already registered as a nonprofit and they have their license nationwide.
Oh, that's interesting. Um, so I have an interesting question from Lori, and this may be another gray area, but she is thinking about submitting a grant to a local company and trying to get grant money that way. But the foundation that would be providing that money to the local company is located out of state. So is that an instance where she needs to be registered to solicit in the state of the parent company?
It would be where the solicitation is occurring. So if they're reaching out to the foundation in that particular state, that state where that foundation is located at and where that, solicitation is occurring, that would be the state that you'd have to be registered in.
Okay. I am getting a lot of questions. One of them is about harbor compliance in particular. And they actually wanted to know how many clients you handle, and of those, how many are registered in all of the states that require compliance registration.
Great question. So we currently work with over 10,000 charities throughout the U.S. In total, we have about 25,000 different clients because we service other heavily regulated areas outside of nonprofits. But nonprofits specifically, we work with about 10,000 of them.
Okay.
And I would say of our clients that are, have fundraising registrations, about, I would say 80% of them do take the approach to get registered nationwide.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
just so it doesn't limit their ability to do any type of fundraising. They can have events, they can use third party platforms, they can really do any type of fundraising at that point and be proactive, anytime they want. But that other 20%, they'll take a more targeted approach. Maybe the goal in mind as they get started is to expand nationwide. So, maybe they start off in 10 states, take a targeted approach, and then 6 months down the road, expand into another 5 or 10 states to eventually get to that point where they're covered nationwide.
Okay. Um, I also have gotten a couple of questions about pricing for harbor compliance. Do you have kind of a base pricing rate? Do you do it based on the nonprofit size? Is there somewhere people can go to look at your pricing?
Yeah, so actually the best way to do that, because there's a lot of different factors involved with our pricing in terms of, do they use it? Do they have any commercial co-venture campaigns? Are they working with any professional solicitors or a fundraising council? There's just a lot of variables, and we use a per state flat fee rate, so it would depend on the number of states as well that they'd be interested in having us manage. So what I would certainly like to share with the group here is that my email address is there on the screen. Feel free to email me directly. I'd love to connect with you over a brief 15 or 30-minute call, get a good understanding of you and your situation, and then I'd certainly be able to provide you with some pricing at that point for our services.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that covers the majority of the questions I had. Everyone, I know a few of you have asked about who to contact at Harbor Compliance. There you go. His name is Warren. He's great. And he will be the best person to talk to if you do have questions about getting set up. I have gone through most of the questions that have kind of fallen into broad categories, but if you do have any more specific questions, do feel free to tweet at me and I can get in touch with Warren or get you in touch with him directly. I did want to give everyone a heads up. We did have a little glitch in the recording at the beginning of the video. So I am working with the people at Harbor Compliance to get you all of the information that you expect from me. Keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow. I'll send you a link to the recording. We do have most of Warren's presentation recorded, but if you do see a link to a transcript or to slides, that's why. We had a little issue with the recording. Thank you everyone for being here with us on this Thursday. I know that you are busy, you have big important jobs, and I appreciate you sharing your time with us. Warren, this has been super illuminating. I didn't know 99% of the things you covered today, so I know I learned a lot, and I know this is a question that we get from a lot of people who raise money with QGive. So thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you so much for having us. I enjoyed being here with everyone today.
Awesome. Everyone keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow morning for that email, and I will be in touch with everyone soon.